Welcome back to Products and Health Tech, a community for health tech product leaders by product leaders. I'm Chris Hoyd, principal at Vinyl. Today we're talking with Jennifer Geetter, a partner at the law firm McDermott, Will and Emery. Jennifer advises healthcare and digital health clients on the legal and compliance issues associated with bringing innovative healthcare solutions to providers and patients. Jennifer shares some great insights today about how innovators should think about AI and data governance, compliance issues related to AI and privacy, and how the patchwork of state and federal guidance on AI can both inhibit and in some cases accelerate AI innovation. Let's jump into that conversation. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome to the podcast. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we met at Vive a few months ago. Let's just start with your background and how you got to your sort of current position. Can you talk us through your journey a little bit?
Sure. It's good to see you again. And thank you again for the records. They were a big hit. So I would say I've been just very lucky. No one starts out 20 years ago and says, I'm going to be a digital health lawyer or an AI lawyer. Those careers didn't exist. But I have, as folks sort of say, followed the data. So I did research compliance that led to genomics, that led to large data related work. And that led to AI starting around maybe 2016. So I've just been lucky to work on issues at the intersection of healthcare and digitalization and see them both in my life as a patient and my life as a legal practitioner.
So just followed sort of your own interests and your own conviction about maybe what might be interesting. And all of a sudden you're a leader in the field.
If you say so, I'll take it.
Can you describe just, for our listeners who maybe are coming more from a product or operator perspective, who may not know what the day-to-day of a lawyer is like. Can you talk us through what your day-to-day is like and what you love about it?
Yeah, sure. So I would say I function a little bit like product counsel, but just for a lot of different products. So the issues that I work on, privacy, data strategies, which is related to privacy, but is really about how you use data as your asset within an organization, research and innovation, public trust, which is something I hope we get to talk a little bit more about because I don't think we talk enough about it. These are all embedded in how you develop a product, its features, its safeguards, how you talk about your product, and also your customers. They could be health plans, they could be hospitals, they could be patients. They all have both regulatory needs and normative needs, expectations about how products will work in their environment. Those are difficult to reverse engineer. So I typically work with clients really from the beginning through the end to try to identify these issues as we go and make risk-based decisions for how we are going to deal with them, especially because innovation in products is happening faster than innovation in law in many cases. And so trying to understand what should the answer be or what are the possible answers is really, in my experience, part of developing products that will have stickiness with your customers. So that's my typical day. It could be on an actual product. It could be on a service. The clients range from traditional healthcare clients, but also, and I think this is common for many digital health lawyers, retail companies or other folks that are new to healthcare, but are taking the expertise they have in another market and seeing if it can be transferred or made applicable in healthcare. So in a given day, I might work on a dozen different things, and that definitely makes it exciting and hectic.
Very cool. Okay, so are there any examples you can point to, or maybe kind of generic or genericized examples of you kind of anticipating the regulatory issues for a client, that kind of working out well for them, and then maybe expanding into a market or a new round of funding or whatever it might be?
Yeah, sure. I think sometimes there's an impression that lawyers are the party of no, and that our job is to come in the bottom of the ninth inning and mess it up for everyone. And actually we do our best work in the early innings. So our job, if we think about it right, should be figuring out maybe you can't do it exactly the way you planned, but you can do it some other way. And it should be, in my mind, one of two things, a reasonably fast fail. So identifying for companies product ideas that they just don't fit for whatever reason under the current marketplace. And that could be there's no reimbursement available for it. You may not have a commercial strategy. It may be too crowded a field. It may have privacy issues. And then also, assuming that's not the case, how do you pick smart risks? And I think that's really important. What risks are really worth it because they're essential to the safe and effective use of the product. They're reasonable under existing regulatory regimes that may be a bit ambiguous. They're worth it for a pilot, so that kind of balancing. There are not always black and white answers in digital health, and you have to be comfortable operating with some ambiguity. So an example would be thinking about a product or service that would require a large amount of a certain type of data. So inventorying the data available for a particular product and service and figuring out, do we have it? Do we have the rights to that data? Do we have the kinds of rights we need for this product or service? Or is it going to flounder because some of the data inputs aren't going to be there? Or another example would be, everyone knows that the U.S. health system has some hiccups in how it's designed. People get their healthcare all sorts of different ways. Thinking about how your product will be paid for. Is it going to be reimbursed through standard insurance, or do you need to look for other ways of doing it? For example, a per member per month fee structure with a self-funded health plan that's interested in plug-in solutions where there may be some expertise, especially for certain types of specialty care, behavioral health, fertility, and other types of services where you might look outside your typical network. So sort of thinking through all of those different pieces. I work as part of a team, most digital health lawyers do, sort of to anticipate those types of issues.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the mix of clients or types of clients that you work with? Is it mostly sort of venture-backed early stage companies? Is it, pharma looking at digital innovation? Are they health systems? Is it just a mix of everything?
I mean, the nice thing, I think, for me and for the team that I work with is that we see all different types of clients. Not only does that make our jobs more fun, I think it makes us more effective as attorneys. We have a sense of all of the different types of stakeholders that are trying to deliver healthcare, whether that's on the product side or the front lines. And you need a sense of that. You can have the best, most disruptive technology, but if hospitals are going to be afraid to use it, then the disruption wasn't constructive. It didn't get us anywhere. So being able to speak with clients and saying, this is what health plans are going to be listening for. This is how you can make your product or service more compelling. Or, look, we work with a ton of provider networks. This is what they're going to find a little clunky about your offering. Here's how you might change it. So I think working with a diverse array of types of clients can make you honestly a better lawyer. The early stage companies are exciting and challenging. They have a lot of needs, and it's sometimes hard for them to prioritize legal needs when they're trying to keep the lights on. So with our early stage companies, what we're really trying to do is identify the gating legal items, the things that if they don't think about now, they're building their business a bit on sand, and then helping them identify those issues where when they've gotten to a further, series raise, they can come back to, and really triaging their legal needs. So we work really with very, very early stage companies to, the largest companies that are out there, both here in the US and globally.
Very cool. And you use the word clunky, which I think for a product audience is kind of a, maybe a trigger word. And that really does. It does speak to your role as product counsel, it sounds like. So you are really getting into conversations, not just about risk necessarily, but sort of the viability of a lot of these products.
Yes.
Which is cool.
Yeah, it's fun. And I think it mirrors how product counsel often works inside companies when they're really involved as part of the development innovation team.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm curious, and maybe this will be tough to sort of find the broad strokes because the mix of clients is so variable. But I'm just sort of curious over the last couple of years if you've seen any shifts in the kinds of issues that the clients are worried about or bringing to you for advice on.
Sure. I don't think you can underestimate COVID's impact on healthcare delivery. So COVID among many other things, served as an experiment that you could never have ethically run on a volunteer basis, which is how will, among other things, how will people get their care if by and large they can't leave their homes? And so while there were lots of telehealth and digital health companies before COVID, it created a massive market that was essentially completely elastic, right? There was only growing demand. And I think we learned a lot from that experience that we're now working through in the sort of post-COVID years when people now have a choice. And one thing that we're seeing is that in many cases, people prefer a digital solution. They didn't go to see, for example, their counselor in person for years. They got used to getting their counseling on Zoom. And we see an explosion of behavioral health related services. So I think, one thing that we see as a trend, I say digital health, there's no such thing, it's health at this point. Everything has a digital health component, even brick and mortar care has a digital health component. So I think that's a major thing. What is the best way for my company to deliver my product or service? Virtual entirely, all the way to largely brick and mortar and everything in between. Another thing that we're talking more about, and I think that's really important, is social determinants of health. And that has a big impact on digital health delivery. Not everyone is connected in the same way to digital health. And that's not just patients, it's also providers. So for example, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about AI later on, but when you think about AI governance, that's going to be more easily done. It's hard in all cases, more easily done for a large health system than a smaller community hospital that is sort of at the front lines of healthcare in their community. So thinking about how we have not just the traditional disparities in healthcare, but I think we're starting to see a technological divide that we are going to have to think about. And when you hear about discrimination in AI models, that's another variety of that. The data it was fed isn't necessarily representative. I think another conversation that I see companies have more and more is, did they actually build their businesses to compete in a data economy? So, this may not be the most exciting topic in the world, but do you have data mapping inside your business? Do you actually know what data you have, how granular it is? Is it well curated? Have you brought the same rigor to your data inventory that you would bring to your components inventory if you were making, a tangible device product? There was, this huge big data revolution. No one wanted to be left behind. And I think what we're finding is that the quality of the data we have to power our innovation isn't always there. We're hearing from AI companies, for example, they can't get enough good data to train their models to be fit for purpose. So I think these are common themes. How do we go back to the basics in some way and build a data architecture within our business that is fit for scale?
Interesting. Yeah, not to plug my employer Vinyl, but that's something we've started to realize because we happen to be, good at the non-sexy stuff. Sort of the data.
Non-sexy stuff, it turns out, is really important.
Pretty important.
It's pretty important. And it can sometimes be hard to get folks excited about it, but it's the basic building blocks of digital healthcare. And, you walk the halls of HLTH or Vive and you see, one amazing far out idea after another, but they're all based on having a sound structure. And so I do, one trend that I see that I think is overdue is asking those foundational questions. We have to think of something better than non-sexy. I think, foundational, critical architecture that you need highways in a country. We need that on our data front. And we do not have like an infrastructure bill for data the way that we have for other types of infrastructure. And it really shows.
Oh, that's an interesting analogy. I love that. Okay.
Like roads aren't sexy either,
right.
But it would be really hard to get around without them.
Right. Okay. And that's more than just interoperability. That's
way more. Interoperability is certainly a piece of it. And, I think there's analogies that you could draw to make that, real for listeners, but it's only one piece of it. There's so many other things that we need beyond interoperability that we don't have. And some of those are a reflection of our state versus federal system. Some of those are privacy artifacts. But some of this is, what I started to call data NIMBYism. We all want the benefits. None of us want our data to be used for this. There's a whole list of issues that, again, I want to call them infrastructure, because I think that sounds better, Chris, that folks need to think about, and we spend a lot of time on them.
Interesting. So, and I suppose that's very context specific based on the client, whether it's an early stage company or a health system, and maybe even contextual based on a health system's contractual arrangement with their EHR. You must see 31 flavors of issues related to that.
Baskin Robbins digital health, right? Or something that had 31 flavors. Yeah, we see it in every different way, but it is important to recognize these are not completely sui generis questions. I mean, there are themes, and we need to take seriously that the common denominator for most of these businesses is the quality of the data. That's not taking anything away from the IP or the people, but without the data, they aren't going to be able to do what they want to do. And thinking about your data strategies, the interoperability piece, the privacy piece, the normative piece, the IP piece, these are essential ingredients to make sure that you can do what you set out to do.
You get so close to the business model and the viability of a lot of these companies. We kind of went through this phase. I don't want to call it a bubble that popped, but there was I would say a focus of investment and energy on the world of kind of digital therapeutics for a few years. And it seems like that may have decreased a bit recently. I'm just curious if you came close to that at all, if you have any thoughts on where that sort of subsector could go to, to find some more traction. But yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Look, last year was not kind to digital health and to many sectors. My hunch, based on nothing, is that is temporary, because healthcare is a huge single sector of the United States economy. And for reasons we've already talked about together, we are not going back to an entirely brick and mortar system. People don't want it. And it's also not cost effective. In many cases, digital health saves federal health programs and others money. You can see more patients. You don't have folks sitting in waiting rooms and so forth. And that's a long list. So I think this will come back, but it's been tough. And digital therapeutics are some of the hardest products to get approved. If you have a consumer-facing app that assists with health and wellness that falls outside of what the FDA directly regulates, your path to market isn't easy, but it's more direct. Digital therapeutics are going to be a highly regulated category. So there was always going to be a lag time as the FDA thought about those products, established safety and effectiveness standards, and they began to get to market and then get reimbursed. One thing that's important to remember is FDA approval means that your product is sufficiently safe and effective as determined by the FDA and consistent with your label to be marketed in the US. It doesn't mean anyone has to pay for it, include it in their plan of benefits. So this is a multi-year process for products that are so highly regulated and may not fit neatly into an existing reimbursement code, or the existing reimbursement code, and I think this is important, may be too little. So there may be a code that would be appropriate, but ultimately it's not commercially sustainable. So then you're going through the process of trying to get new reimbursement coding, which we help with at McDermott, but that's also a long process. So these are some of the coolest products, but they are not overnight success stories by and large. But I think they're coming. I don't think you can stop the digitalization of healthcare in really any respect.
Okay, so on that optimistic note, and I think we do have a few questions on AI that I'm very curious your thoughts on. I don't want to over AI us, but I do know you're living and breathing a lot of this stuff right now. Currently, what you're seeing out of AI capabilities, how do you see those being applied in the near term in health tech, and how do you advise a company that's exploring those capabilities? What are the sort of regulatory guardrails in the space that they need to be aware of?
I'm glad you asked. I think first we have to decide what we mean by AI. We're all using this term, and it covers the gamut of basic machine learning, really algorithmic thinking, to these, sci-fi stories that we read about in the newspaper, and sort of the robots are coming for us. That's an incredibly broad spread of technology. And so when companies are thinking about both their internal programs, their internal compliance programs, and the regulatory frameworks that exist, the answer to that question is going to be different depending on the type of AI they're intending to use. And I think we sometimes collapse this all behind, one term or one definition. But these are vastly different products with different abilities and different risks. And if you had an AI governance program that was regulating your use or development of generative AI, and it was based on, early, already well-deployed AI, you'd be missing a whole bunch of compliance issues. And the reverse is also true. If you use the safeguards that are appropriate for Gen AI for your basic, administrative AI functions, you're probably over-compliancing yourself. You won't get in trouble for that, but you're probably making it much harder to run your business and not getting much compliance boost for that. So I think first figuring out what kind of AI you're using and why. I think the second is, folks have heard me say this before, just be wary of AI FOMO. You don't have to use it. If it's not the best solution for your problem, that's fine. You should use particular AI products and services and tools when they are your best choice, both economically and for safety and effectiveness reasons. But if you have a non-AI solution that's working just fine and you're getting your job done, that's also okay. And some of the compliance and implementation hassles we see are the sense that people are missing out, and they have to implement AI before they really need it or are ready. They don't. I think the other thing I would say is to watch the states. So many states have started to regulate AI or are in the process of thinking about how to do that when it comes to healthcare, sometimes in consumer protection spaces, sometimes in healthcare licensure spaces. I think they feel like they need to kind of get off the bench because we don't have a lot of regulation or guidance at the federal level. This could look a lot like our federated privacy system, right? Where we have the federal government, we have non-preempted state law, and companies have struggled for years in how to have a national deployment when privacy rules differ by state. So I think really working with state regulators, helping them understand how AI works, getting them comfortable with where they may have a role regulating and where they don't need to feel like they do. The one major caution I would give folks who are trying to develop AI is to mind the gap between AI training and research. By and large, research involving human subjects is defined as an activity where you interact with someone or intervene with them, like take a blood draw or give them a survey, or about whom you have identifiable data. And it's an or. So if you are doing an analytic project to generate generalizable knowledge on large data sets, you very well may be doing research involving human subjects if that data is identifiable. If you are training AI in certain ways to see if it can perform certain functions, you might reach a similar result. And I think because we talk about training AI instead of studying AI, I think sometimes folks are missing at least to call the question of why or why not. It may be research. And then finally, I would say the IP landscape is evolving for AI, and that you need to think of as both inputs and outputs. So what are the IP considerations for the data you are using to teach your AI? And then what is the law saying right now about the protectability of the AI outputs? Sometimes these I think are getting collapsed, but they're actually two different IP questions. And you really go to an IP AI expert. I'm lucky to have them here at McDermott, but that is a very technical question, but I think an important one to be asking.
So is it fair to say that there are a lot of dimensions of this technology that the innovation is ahead of the regulation by quite a ways? Okay.
Yeah, the innovation is ahead of the regulation because there is no way lawmakers could operate at the speed of innovators. It's an impossible task. And we have so many different innovators who are trying to do different things. I think if you look at the concerns at the federal level, they're more focused on either generative AI, concerns that AI can jump the box, essentially, and around discrimination, either AI tools that will give faulty results because they've been poorly taught, or AI that is inherently, discriminatory or dangerous from a public policy perspective, impersonating someone's voice. And we saw this, impersonating someone's voice and pretending you're a candidate. Or we see this in certain types of spear phishing and ransomware attacking, where the AI makes the attack seem even more real, harder to detect. So I think some of the concerns are really about where AI is acting in a nefarious way or a dangerous way. And I think we have to be very thoughtful about those.
That was an incredible answer. Thank you. I think maybe if we can, as you said, there are so many versions of AI right now that gets thrown a lot. One, more specific application of it is, as you sort of highlighted, the generative AI applicability to capturing, empowering, summarizing, recommending within the context of clinical conversations. So whether it's, something that lives in an EHR and supports a physician during a patient visit or helps them with their, charting later on. I'm curious if you've seen anything sort of specific in those contexts that you tend to advise those clients on or try to get ahead of?
AI doesn't get tired. So there are tasks that AI can do that we should probably give it. So I remember listening to an AI discussion, and that there was a physician who said, that they found that patients preferred prescription refill emails that were AI written because they were nicer. It said things like, "Hey, Chris, I'm so glad I could get this prescription in for you before you went on vacation." Whereas the physician who's doing a million different things is just glad he got the prescription in for you and wrote to you, "Chris, filled," or sent. So there are certain types of tasks like you're describing that go to sort of patient management, where the thoughtful deployment of AI may improve both the patient experience and the provider experience. Our providers are very burned out. COVID, is the straw that broke the camel's back in this regard. And I think we need to take that burnout very seriously. And so if you have AI that you can deploy as like a personal assistant, it gets a first draft of your note written, it tees up your prescription refills. It alerts you in a clinical decision support mechanism about those patients that really need your time today because they haven't picked up their prescriptions or they're late for this appointment or what have you. You'll see better outcomes for both patients and provider satisfaction. The important thing to ask yourself is, what can this tool do and what can it not do? And that should be what we do for any tool in the healthcare space. This is not a new thing. We have off-label use for a reason. So what are these tools capable of doing? Let's take a scribe, because you mentioned it. A scribe can be very good at taking a complicated appointment, organizing it, and getting that first draft down on paper. As human beings, we appreciate this, right? It's often the first draft of anything that's the hardest, and then you refine it. If a physician then can read that note, clarify some things, but they aren't doing like the laboring or writing up a note, that can be really helpful. But the physician is the last pair of eyes, for example, on that note. It's the physician's note. This is no different than having a note taker in the room. The physician would still be responsible for taking those notes from a human being and turning them into something for the EMR. So I think in a lot of the documentation realm, the planning, the triaging, AI can be really powerful, because these aren't tasks necessarily that patients care if their providers are doing. And patients are already getting AI-enabled care in this way. Clinical decision support is a kind of machine learning. It's not generative AI necessarily, but it's machine learning. So I think thinking at that is really important. The second thing is getting patients comfortable with it. I teach a law school class, and I assign Mission Impossible to my students. Probably not a common component of a law school curriculum, but the last two movies, the last one hasn't come out yet, involves the entity, which is this sort of evil AI thing that controls people. That has a huge impact on public imagination. Of AI going inherently rogue. And I don't mean to minimize the risks of AI. We can certainly talk about them, but I also think it's worrisome to exaggerate them. And so if you are a woman over, I don't know, 40 or 45, you've had a mammogram every year, you've probably had a mammogram with AI assisted radiology review, and you didn't think anything about it, and you weren't worried about it, and you weren't concerned about the use of AI in your care because you didn't really think of it as artificial intelligence. As we now have the public marinating in all of these stories around AI, what if you had an AI scribe in a hospital room and the patient was discomforted by this like audio video thing, entity in the room recording it, and patients decline the use of those tools, and is that really an informed choice? So I think we have to empower folks to have thoughtful conversations with patients so that their appreciation of the risks and benefits are balanced, so that when AI is going to be useful to them and to their providers, it can go forward. And I don't know that we're doing that yet.
Okay, so it does sound like you're of the opinion that at least for now in the foreseeable future, the value offered by some of those, generative AI applications is well outweighs the risk, the downside.
I think the risks that we're seeing of some of the Gen AI are not necessarily in healthcare. So, there are real risks. I think we need to find a way to have a conversation that is not dystopic on one end and naive, that the days of work are behind us and machines will do it all. The truth is hard, nuanced, and in the middle. And people don't always like to have hard conversations. So we need to find a way to turn down the volume, I think, on the panic, so we can focus on the actual real risks, both inside healthcare and outside, and try to prepare for that. And, before we were talking about infrastructure, like the non-sexy stuff, right? There's also non-sexy risks in AI. How do we make sure that good AI tools don't enhance the already existing disparities we have in healthcare? Folks in cities, folks with higher incomes get the best of AI-enabled care. Folks that live outside of cities or have struggle financially don't. I mean, there's all sorts of risks that we have to be thinking about. We just can't be distracted from some of those, from some of the stuff that we see with these very large language models that aren't necessarily being used in healthcare to begin with. No one should be putting a medical question, in their standard ChatGPT and asking it. That's not what it's built for.
I know that AI governance is something that's important to you. You spend a lot of time thinking and talking to clients about. Tell us your thoughts on AI governance at this point.
So in terms of awareness, there's a lot of discussion about whether we should have, an AI agency, an AI at the federal level. For now, we don't have that. And so there are a lot of different federal agencies that within their existing remit govern AI from some particular angle. So you have, for example, the Office of Civil Rights, which administers the privacy, security, and breach notification HIPAA rules. A lot of what we could talk about with respect to AI governance would be about data, so they have their piece. You have ONC, you mentioned the FDA, you have the FTC, you have CMS and reimbursement related activities. There are all these different and you have states, as we talked about, all these different stakeholders, and they each see a piece of the puzzle. So I think one important step for any stage company is to avoid, regulatory whack-a-mole where they solve their FDA problem at the expense of creating a privacy problem. You have to really try to look at these holistically. That's not a new problem. That's not an AI-generated problem, but because AI is so out in front of the regulations, I think it's a particularly acute one. So really understanding the variety of regulators who might care about what you're doing, might have provided guidance or other types of tools to give you a sense of what they're hoping for, may have existing regulations that are going to be grafted onto what you're doing. I think that is important, and it's a hard task and not always an intuitive one. And the US system is different than most of the international systems. So I don't minimize how difficult that is for companies, early stage or not. But I think it's an important component to longevity. In terms of the liaison function, I think it depends a little bit on the agency, and also there's congressional interest in this topic. So my sense is that both regulators and members of Congress want to do this right. They are aware that the technology isn't just going to regulate itself, and they can't be totally hands off. But it's a very complicated subject. I mean, from just an engineering perspective, it's really complicated, and I think there is some caution in rushing in and regulating in a way that will either be way too permissive or will strangle the industry, and that's a difficult task. So what I think in the meantime is really important is that companies think about their own self-governance. Complying with whatever legal components are out there is the minimum. But if you are starting a company, or you're a lawyer in a company, or a compliance officer, or you're head of product, think of yourselves as a public steward. And I don't mean to sound Pollyannish. I really mean this. You probably know more about how your product or service works than anyone else can. Think about how you want it to work in the market. Prepare for the above the fold New York Times story. Take that seriously, not just as a risk or liability modification, but because you're proud of what you do. And I think if you ask yourself that question, we've seen terrific product innovations around that. And I think in the meantime, that's part of our best defense is companies that take that part seriously. And I think in the end, compliance will be a commercial differentiator. I think public trust is really important in general, but here, because we need the data from all of us. We want it to be representative. We want AI to reflect back the community. So we need the community to feel like they're ready to participate. Otherwise, the training data is going to be skewed, as will the product. And we also want people to feel comfortable and confident using the products and services that make sense for them, and being part of the conversation about where we're not ready to go. And I'm not sure we're quite doing that yet. Finding ways to involve the public. So, I do a lot of research work. IRBs have had community members for years. Do you have community voices as part of AI governance generally, or in the industry? Have you provided training to frontline healthcare providers who are going to get these AI questions, especially in the growing number of states that have a transparency requirement, meaning a disclosure requirement? So do folks feel empowered to have these conversations? Are these conversations that all providers need to be ready to have, or do we have AI ambassadors? Have we thought about analogies that can help explain this? Any client that hears this will know that most of my analogies come from kid stories and fairy tales. I guess you can't take the mom out of the lawyer, but they help. They help us feel like, okay, AI is not totally new. We've done other things that can help us do this well and profitably, and in a way that we can be proud of. So all of these are tools that can have the AI reflect back, not just on the data, but on our values. And I think this is really important. And different companies are going to do it different ways. I've seen some tech companies have a trust page, where they are not just doing their privacy policy, they're really talking about it. Consumers may not go there, but if they want, they can. And then I think thinking about AI literacy, for the public, for schools, our young people are only going to grow up in a post AI world, and do they understand it? And I think you talk about like financial literacy for kids. I think AI literacy is really important.
Thanks so much for joining us. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or on our website at productandhealthtech.com. If you have ideas or suggestions on what you'd like to hear in a future episode, or if you'd like to be a guest, please shoot us an email at info@productandhealthtech.com.